The insane world of ultra high-end audio. Is it all a scam? Are they gaslighting us? Is it a great conspiracy? I don't know. But the more I'm in this world, the more high-end, ultra high-end audio I've seen, I am starting to think that this is just an insane conspiracy. And we're all just frogs in a pot with the temperature continuing to rise. Are $600,000 speakers just designed to separate a fool from their money? I haven't quite figured that out, but let's talk about it today. I was talking to a friend of mine about this very subject, and we're both desensitized to it. We're going to talk about that later. But when I got into camera photography, for instance, I knew I wanted to get into it, and as a newcomer, I have to put myself or try to look at things from a newcomer's perspective. And that's why I started this channel. But when I wanted to buy a good camera, an interchangeable lens camera, I had this number in my mind, and that was $500. You don't know anything about photography, so you think, I got $500, I want to buy a nice camera. Now, there are cameras, or there were cameras, that are $500. But when I started to explore the world of cameras, I saw that there were $2,000 cameras. I saw that there were $10,000 cameras, $20,000 lenses. And although those prices offended me, my mind did change about what is acceptable. And I think that's key. A $5,000 camera just became part of the normal landscape. And I think the same is true with high-end audio. So the ultra high-end part of the hobby was something that I really didn't know existed. I knew there were expensive products from the brands even the brands that I owned. I knew Macintosh existed. I knew that was super expensive. And when I was a teenager, I had a subscription to Stereo Review. And I would read these articles and I'd see these awesome products, and invariably, the last paragraph of each article would talk about the price. I wouldn't be able to find the price. I would have to search and search, and it was always the last paragraph. And it was always a $10,000 product. And I just remember being defeated about that because they were so expensive, so far outside of a teenager's budget that they just seemed impossible. So I kind of knew that this world existed. But I would consider that the dumb part of this hobby. I would consider that to be the aspirational part of this hobby. So this is a Leica camera, okay? It's aspirational. It is twice the price, maybe 3 times the price of a camera that I'm using here. Perfectly good camera. And actually the camera that I'm filming myself on is way better than this camera. However, this camera has some intangibles about how it feels and also how I interact with it when I'm taking pictures. The same can be said about watches. I used to have a couple of Rolexes. I no longer have a couple of Rolexes. I sold them. But a Rolex is an aspirational piece. Now you can get better time, more accurate time from your cell phone. And a $500 Seiko pretty much does everything that the $10,000 Rolex does. But even normies that aren't into watches understand that Rolexes exist, that they're more expensive, but they are part of the accepted reality that everybody lives in. So the world of Rolexes, of Leica cameras, of $20,000 speakers and amps is the dumb part of the hobby. But then there's the truly insane part of the audiophile hobby. And I was introduced to this at audio shows. $600,000 speakers, $1 million systems. And while that's kind of the exception to the rule, it's not really that rare. It's not like you're looking for Sasquatch or the Chupacabra where you know they exist. Or at least you think they exist. You're never gonna find them. But you can find a $600,000 pair of speakers. And what was the most surprising part to me was that it didn't seem to really surprise anybody. Everybody that walked through those rooms were all in a complete acceptance that this was a thing. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills.
I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!
Most of us have heard of the law of diminishing returns, which means the more money you spend on a product, there is a point of non-linear improvements in performances. Now, I think the law of diminishing returns is a bit of a moving target because you can't just say this $2,000 amplifier is going to be better than my $500 amplifier, because amplifiers and speakers and DACs and turntables all have a different bit of a sound. But I do think the law of diminishing returns is a thing if you truly understand the sound that you're going for or the experience that you're going for. Because there could be a $2,000 amp that's really analytical and clean, but your $500 amplifier is very warm and engaging, has a bunch of second order harmonics. So the $2,000 amp is not going to give you 4 times the amount of enjoyment. Actually, it's going to be less enjoyable because you don't like that sound. However, if you find a $2,000 amp that is warm, has a bunch of second order harmonics, it probably is going to give you 4 times the enjoyment. So why do people buy $20,000 CD players or $600,000 pairs of speakers? So when I started going to shows, most of the products would fall into what I would consider to be the stupid category. Remember, stupid is Leica cameras, stupid is Rolex watches. And at audio shows, I thought stupid was, I don't know, $20,000 to $50,000 components. But you would go room to room, you'd listen to some of these products, they would sound good, and then you go to another room, and there would be a $10,000 speaker that you thought sounded pretty good. It just went from $50,000. Now we're at $10,000, and we have now become the frog in the pot, because now that $10,000 speaker is a bargain. God forbid we find a $5,000 speaker that we like. That's 10% of the cost of that $50,000 speaker. But prior to walking into that hotel, the thought of buying a $10,000 speaker was offensive to me. Now it's a bargain. And this is the point where it gets complicated, and maybe even unethical. And my definition of ethics is coming from me. Obviously, it's not coming from the people that are trying to sell you these products. And I'm not saying all these products are bad or all the people selling these products are unethical, but there are some. But the complicated part comes from if you're maybe new and you're talking to some of these people for the first time, and you're starting to kind of understand the price points of higher end audio. And the people that are in these rooms, that are running these rooms, are, well, experts, especially if you're new. Absolutely, they're speaking from a position of authority. So when they say something like, well, you're not going to get a good DAC unless you spend $5,000, and I have heard that before. Some people will walk out of there thinking that's BS, but others will just nod their head and say, oh, okay. I guess I do need to buy a $5,000 DAC, because that position completely dismisses anything else that is below that price. And I'm willing to bet that the most affordable DAC that company sells is probably $5,000. The red flag for me is all-encompassing statements. Like anything above is good, anything below is bad. And if you want good, then you need to be above. And without knowing more, without exploring more, that perceived fact now becomes truth, and truth is what drives behavior. So the absurdity of spending $5,000 or $10,000 on a pair of speakers or on an amplifier doesn't seem so absurd anymore. And now, we're gaslit. And now the truly insane. I was just at the Florida Audio Show, and there was a room that had a pair of $600,000 speakers. And if you wanted to upgrade these speakers to get them veneered, guess how much that was? $90,000 for the veneer upgrade. Now I am going to put an asterisk or a caveat on this, because at some point the price gets so ridiculous and absurd that that product really ceases to be a speaker. It really becomes something of, I don't know, a status symbol, maybe audio art. And it's not just a luxury item. It's not just a stupid purchase like a Leica or a Rolex. That product now transcends the entire market. And the irony is that the $600,000 speaker doesn't offend me as much as the $60,000 speaker, because it's divorced from reality. It's divorced from the market. It's like buying the skull of a saber-toothed tiger or something like that. Actually, I had a job and the owner was a bit of a narcissist, and he literally had the skull of a saber-toothed tiger in the conference room. Having that in the conference room was literally just a flex for anybody that came in and sat down. Oh, that guy has a saber-toothed tiger skull. He must be really important and have money. Maybe in retrospect, he probably shouldn't have had the saber-toothed tiger skull. Having the skull of an extinct quadruped might mean that their margins are pretty healthy. The owners of the company that were selling the $600,000 speakers were actually nice people. I talked to them. But there was no pretense that their product performed better than anything else. The sales pitch was that this is really the height. This is the epitome of design. This is the epitome of sound. This is the epitome of truly rare and wonderful audiophile products. But again, when we accept that a $600,000 speaker exists, then a speaker that costs 10% of that price at $60,000 seems a little bit easier to swallow. And a $6,000 speaker that is 1% the cost of that $600,000 speaker just seems like the logical choice. Are the peddlers of audiophile insanity simply predators when they're selling $600,000 speakers? I don't think so, because there's no pretense when you're selling $600,000 speakers. You have no competition when you're selling $600,000 speakers. The people that are buying those $600,000 speakers aren't really being driven by performance or even audio enjoyment, but maybe they are. Maybe them listening to their music through a pair of $600,000 speakers makes the experience more enjoyable. But when you're selling a pair of $60,000 speakers, there's definitely a speaker out there that costs $10,000 that probably is built similarly, if not better. The contents of that speaker probably perform similarly, if not better. And the $10,000 speaker is probably the better choice for most people. Now, I'm not saying what somebody should do with their money. It's your money. People worked hard for it. They can spend it on whatever they want. But I do think there are predators in this hobby. There are people out there that will try to convince you that a box full of rocks will actually be really good for grounding of your system, and that's not hyperbole. There was literally in Chicago at Axpona a guy selling a wooden box filled with some type of crystals that he claimed made your system sound better because it grounded your power cable better. That's predatory. That's imagination. I also think that the high-end cable market is also predatory. I'm not talking about $2, $3, $4, even $1,000 pair of speaker cables or interconnects. I'm talking about the $10,000, the $20,000 pair of speaker cables. Most of the time, those companies will offer an in-home trial so people can listen to it. And if people think it sounds better, fine. And they have the money, fine. But the narrative surrounding this cable being better than a $500 cable or a $100 cable, I think, is predatory. But the fact that a $10,000 speaker cable exists, the fact that a $10,000 box of rocks exists, I think is the real problem. And I think because people are buying them is absolute, irrefutable evidence that we have all been gaslit, that we've all bought into the propaganda and the narrative. And while most of us scoff at these products, we are aware that they exist, even though their existence is offensive to us. But because we know that they exist, because we know they're not out of a fairy tale, I think that means that the gaslighting has worked, that the propaganda has worked, that the conspiracy is true. Thanks so much for watching.